ever wondered why some people seem to have a gift for music? Have you ever wished that you could play by ear, sing in tune, improvise and jam? You're in the right place. Time to turn those wishes into reality. Welcome to the Musicality Podcast with your host, Christopher Sutton.
Today we're going to be talking about the 12-bar blues. This was mentioned in our recent interview with Bill Hilton, author of How to Really Play the Piano. But what we'll be discussing today matters whether or not you play piano or the blues. You may have heard of the 12-bar blues before and have a vague idea of what it is. In this episode, I'm going to talk about what exactly it is, where you'll hear it, and why it's worth knowing about, even if you don't like the blues. So what is the 12-bar blues? The 12-bar blues is simply a particular chord progression which is 12 bars long. It's helpful to think of it as being arranged into 3 lines, each of 4 bars. It uses just the 1, 4 and 5 chords. And if you don't know what I mean by that, please check out episode 33 about the 1, 4, 5 and 6 chords. It actually tends to use the 5-7 chord instead of the plain 5, which just means that it adds a 4th note to the chord, which is note 7 above the root. We call this the 5-7. For simplicity, I'm going to just be saying 5 as I continue, but do keep in mind it's normally actually a 7th chord, not a regular major chord like the 1 and the 4. It's a 5-7. So for example, if we're in the key of C major, then our 3 chords for the 12-bar blues are going to be C major with the notes C, E and G, that's our 1 chord, F major, the notes F, A and C, that's our 4 chord, and then G7, which is the notes G, B, D and F, that's our 5-7 chord. The 12-bar blues is just a progression which uses these chords in a particular order. So if we think about those 3 lines, each of 4 bars that I mentioned, then our first line is going to be just 4 bars of the 1 chord. Our second line is then 2 bars of the 4 chord, followed by 2 bars of the 1 chord. And our third line is the 5 chord, the 4 chord, and then 2 bars of the 1 chord. In fact, that last chord is often changed to a 5 because that creates a nice turnaround for the whole thing to repeat. So that last line is then 5, 4, 1, 5. Let's listen to an example of that. As you listen, think through 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 1, 1, 5, 4, 1, 5. That was a simple piano arrangement. Let's listen to something with a bit more instrumentation. Now, as you may remember from episode 27 on finding chords in scales, thinking in terms of numbers means that you can easily think about and recognize this same progression in any key. So our C major example would be C, 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 F, F, C, C, G, F, C, G. If we wanted a 12-bar blues in A major, that would instead be A, 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 D, D, A, A, E, D, A, E. So that's all the 12-bar blues is. And it probably sounded familiar to you just now when I played the example, because it crops up all over the place. So where will you hear the 12-bar blues? Well, from the name you'll probably have guessed there is a strong association with blues music. If you listen to old school blues like Muddy Waters, Buddy Guy, John Lee Hooker, you'll hear a lot of songs that simply follow this 12-bar progression. Songs like Sweet Home Chicago, Hoochie Coochie Man, and Messing with the Kid. But as one of the many ways blues influenced early rock music, The 12-bar blues progression also made its way into rock. You can hear it in rock and roll classics like Great Balls of Fire, Johnny B. Good, Rock Around the Clock, Blue Suede Shoes, and also in tracks by blues-influenced rockers like Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, and even Led Zeppelin. I'll put a link in the show notes to a playlist with all these examples and more. Once you get to know the 12-bar blues, it's easy to spot it in music, and it becomes a great case study for tuning your ear in to recognizing chords by ear in the music you hear each day. So why is this worth knowing about even if you don't like blues music? Well, I touched on there one reason why it's worth getting familiar with the 12-bar blues, even if you're not a blues fan and even if you never play blues music. And that's because it's a really elegant example of a 1-4-5 progression, and one you can easily practice recognizing in real music. I love the 12-bar because it's about as simple as you can get with a chord progression while still being interesting. It tells a little musical story. We start out with 4 bars of the 1 chord. This is the home chord, so it feels relaxed and stable, there's not much going on. But then in the second line, we move to the 4 chord. That still sounds pretty comfortable, but it's a definite change, and we can feel it return to the 1 after 2 bars. We're back home, and that could be the end of it, but instead, in line 3 we move to the 5 chord, or normally the 5-7. This is the epitome of tension. This is the peak of the story, and it feels good to then move to the 4 chord, which relaxes things a little, and then back home to the 1. If we throw in the 5-7 as the last chord too, we reintroduce that tension, and it builds some excitement to repeat the whole thing again. When you get familiar with it, this gives you a way to start getting to know these 3 chords and their roles, and it helps you spot them and those transitions from one of them to the other, even if they occur outside of the 12-bar structure. So for example, it gives you a great feel for what it sounds like to go from the 1 to the 5-7, creating that tension, or to go from the 5-7 to the 4 to the 1, gradually releasing that tension. The 12-bar blues is also a great playground for learning to improvise. In episode 21, we talked about chord tones and how choosing your improvised notes based on the current chord can help you to create tension and release and make your solos more musical. The 12-bar blues is a great progression for practicing that with, because you get a chance to see which notes from the major scale or the pentatonic scale fit well with each chord in the progression. And that story we talked about, where the 5 or the 5-7 is the peak of tension and interest, that gives you a natural structure to base your own solo's musical story around. The last thing I'd say about the 12-bar blues is that it's also a good playground for exploring writing lyrics and melodies. A lot of 12-bar blues songs will use a fixed AAB pattern for the lyrics, meaning that if we think in terms of that division of 12 bars into 3 lines, each of 4 bars, then there are 3 lines to the lyrics, and the first 2 are the same as each other. You'll immediately know what I mean if I give you an example like, I woke up this morning and went and played my guitar. Oh yeah, I woke up this morning and went and played my guitar. But when I woke up this morning, I could only play the 12-bar. Now that lyric structure might seem overused and formulaic, but like we've talked about on this show before, and like we teach inside Musical U, when it comes to creative tasks like improvising and songwriting in music, having constraints can actually make it far easier to be creative and find new ideas. So if you're working on writing songs, challenging yourself to write a new and interesting 12-bar blues can actually be a great way to stretch yourself in a new direction. So that's the 12-bar blues. Now you know what it is, what it sounds like, and a few reasons you might want to get to know it better, whether you're a blues fan or not. Check out the show notes for this episode at musicalitypodcast.com to listen to more examples of songs in different genres using a 12-bar blues progression, and try including some 12-bar blues in your own musical life too.
Thank you for listening to the Musicality Podcast. This episode has ended, but your musical journey continues. Head over to musicalitypodcast.com, where you will find the links and resources mentioned in this episode, as well as bonus content exclusive for podcast listeners. That's musicalitypodcast.com.